Cast your minds back to the first day of your careers, getting comfortable with your new responsibilities, learning how to use your work tools, and meeting fellow employees. For most, day one was typically a pretty casual introduction to what was to follow. On Jim Dills' first day on the job in May 1951, he was required to plan and assemble the editorial, photographic, and advertising content required to publish a newspaper 7 days later in a small southern Ontario town where at the time, the Canadian Champion was the prime communications conduit for the community. Rumors were just that until you read it in the Champion. Jim, not yet 22 years of age, and not yet living in Milton, had 1 week to assemble a newspaper that strongly reflected all aspects of the community through its written word and photography, continue the tradition of journalistic excellence established by his father, and do so on time, in a high-quality fashion, and of course, on budget. How monumental was Jim's task? Using a term we are all too familiar with today, the Canadian Champion was our internet. The Canadian Champion was our World Wide Web. Jim would go on to publish more than 1,400 editions of the Champion over the next 27 years. Together with brother David, Jim would build Dills Printing and Publishing into a significant employer in North Holland. And Jim and David would earn unparalleled provincial, federal, and even international recognition for their newspapers in Acton, Georgetown, and Milton. With the Canadian Champion and Dills Printing and Publishing, Jim was thrust into assuming the mantle of leadership early in his life. That notion of accepting responsibility well in advance of his contemporaries became a recurring theme that would come to define his involvements in this growing community, here at St. Paul's, which Carol Hyde will recount, in his favorite pastimes, and in his professional pursuits. The other recurring theme was Jim's life mantra: it has to be right. James Arloff Dills was born in Acton, Ontario on August 11, 1930, to Arloff and Isma Dills. By all accounts, he had a happy childhood, although it was one shaped by the Great Depression and a father who was a hard-working newspaper publisher. It came as no surprise to anyone when Jim was accepted into Ryerson Polytechnical Institute's first journalism program in 1949, and further, that he was recognized for his academic excellence upon graduation. His eldest son, Stephen, would follow in his footsteps almost 30 years later. Jim embraced the joys and responsibility associated with family early in his life, marrying former Shirley Elliott in 1952, establishing roots in Milton in 1954, and celebrating the birth of their first child, Stephen, in 1955. Over the next 12 years, the Dills family would grow to include Mark, Paul, Catherine, and Carol. Jim and Shirley would go on to enjoy a marriage of some 67 years. While they were both raised in Acton, Jim and Shirley considered themselves to be Miltonians. And great Miltonians they were and are. At the age of 26, Jim was elected president of Milton Rotary Club, the community's foremost service club at the time. And assuming the role, he was the youngest president in the Rotary world that year, which included almost 200 countries around the globe. In 1967, at the age of 37, he was named chairman of the Milton Parks Board of Management, continuing that role until it was disbanded as a result of the establishment of regional government in 1974. In 1977, now in his mid-40s, Jim co-founded Milton Historical Society, serving as its president for 4 years. Jim had a plethora of local involvements, but the society gave him the platform to pursue his passion, local history, in a community that needed leadership in that area. The society also gave Jim an opportunity to complete an unfinished assignment given to him by his father: write the definitive history of Milton, as his father had done for Acton. Jim had made a best efforts attempt at doing so in time for Milton's centennial in 1957, and went on to research and write more than 100 articles about the community's history in the pages of the Canadian Champion over the next 2 decades. He returned to the pages of the Champion in 2001, authoring time capsules until earlier this year. But his experience in 1957 nagged at him. He wasn't completely satisfied with the result. Back then, he had assumed there was a level of institutional knowledge about Milton's history to build on, when in fact, there was none. The society was his opportunity to set the record straight, to do it right. Over the next 40 years, Jim authored or co-authored almost 24 books of local history on a myriad of topics and extraordinary levels of depth, establishing he and the society as one of the most prolific chroniclers of local history in Canada. Toronto's Mike Filey might be the only other significant comparator in this category. As ill as he was, 1 month before his passing in July, Jim was still researching and writing Milton's history. Jim was well recognized for his many contributions to our community. Milton Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year and Lifetime Achievement Awards, Milton Heritage Awards, Rotary Club Paul Harris Fellowship, Ontario Heritage Foundation Achievement and Lifetime Achievement Awards, Canada 125th Anniversary Commemorative Medal, Queen Elizabeth Jubilee and Diamond Jubilee Awards, amongst many others, including being inducted into the Town of Milton's Walk of Fame. But even great local deeds don't get you into the Walk of Fame. That is reserved for Miltonians who have shone on the national or international stage for an extended period of time. Jim was amongst the first group to be inducted in 2007 for extraordinary works very few Miltonians know about, but newspaper publishers across Canada are very familiar with and most thankful for. Sensing the economic, competitive, and other forces lining up against the publishing industry, Jim and his brother David sold Dills Printing and Publishing in 1978. In retrospect, probably at the height of the market for their business. Shortly thereafter, Jim was signed on as Executive Director of the Canadian Community Newspaper Association, and for the next 8 years, traveled back and forth across Canada, helping publishers across the country shore up their businesses while advocating with governments and colleges and universities the importance of high-quality community journalism. To say it was missionary work is not putting too fine a point on it. It was a tough assignment. Many local newspapers were saved. Some simply could not be. Jim left no stone unturned. After all, it had to be right. For his considerable efforts, the industry named him an honorary president and honorary life member of the Canadian Community Newspaper Association. He received similar commendations from provincial newspaper associations in Atlantic Canada, British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and the Yukon. In 2000, the Ontario Association named the Dills family amongst its 50 people who had most contributed to the industry over the last 50 years. There is no question that Jim should be remembered for his exemplary stewardship of the Canadian champion at a time when newspapers mattered most to this community. And it is unlikely the Canadian newspaper publishing industry will ever, to quote Shakespeare, look upon his like again. But what is Jim's legacy locally? Here are some of his local achievements to contemplate. Jim uncovered and exposed Milton's rich vein of history for all to understand and appreciate, setting the record straight on a number of historic matters, including how Milton got its name. Jim led the charge to save the county of Milton Courthouse from the wrecking ball and encourage its development as Milton's new town hall. Today, it is one of the most historically significant and beautiful municipal buildings in Ontario. Jim encouraged Milton Rotary Club and the town of Milton to restore and maintain Spring House, the historic residence largely associated with the legendary Canadian hardware entrepreneur P.L. Robertson. It is now in historically sympathetic private ownership. Jim encouraged the town of Milton to dust off the bell at Old Town Hall and ring in the new year to celebrate Canada's centennial in 1967. This has since become an annual tradition. Jim planned Canada's first Canada Day fireworks, which also celebrated Canada's centennial, an event that continues to this day. Jim conceived of the idea of naming Milton streets for significant local, provincial, and national figures. A stroll along Milton's streets today is a walk through local, provincial, and national history. Jim, assisted by Shirley, created a meticulous archive of articles about and photographs of Milton from its modest beginnings in the 1820s to the present day. A little over a year ago, that treasure trove was donated to the Society and can be found in the Cook Dills archives in the Goldie Blacksmith shop. It is currently in the process of being transformed into digital records by the Society to be shared with Miltonians for generations to come. And Jim was a mentor to many in the sanctuary this afternoon. He was a role model for us all. But most of all, Jim was a great son, brother, brother-in-law, husband, father, grandfather, and uncle to his family. Like most men of his generation, and perhaps a few since, Jim regretted not being at home as often as he would have liked because of work commitments. He and Shirley still managed to raise a great family, and Jim would readily give Shirley full credit for that achievement. Their children have had great childhoods and have grown to become high achievers and outstanding citizens who have gone on to raise great families of their own. If Jim were with us today, he would tell you he is proud of his many accomplishments in business, in the community, and at his beloved St. Paul's. But most of all, he's proud of his family. So what is Jim's greatest legacy, his greatest accomplishment in this community? It is his family. In closing, Jim was a hard-working, thoughtful, and modest man who was called upon often and at an early age, rose to the occasion each time, and achieved much in several areas of endeavor. After all, as Jim would say, it had to be right. His essence is appropriately captured by Jasper Martin's favorite poet, the namesake of our community, John Milton, in his poem, Paradise Regained. That who advances his glory, not their own, then he himself to glory will advance. Thank you.